shell, incredible forces are unleashed.
That shell starts off at 0 and 12 milliseconds later is travelling faster than Concorde. It can't be messed around with, electronically or by any other means. It's going to hit its target.
From rudimentary wood and iron to mighty steel monsters on rails, and now super precise guns, light in weight, heavy in impact, mobile and speedy.
He can't catch you because you're moving too quickly, and that's the essence of survivability on the modern battlefield.
The artillery gun, tried and tested for centuries, the ultimate battlefield survivor. This is one of the most powerful pieces of artillery in the world. It can hit targets more than 20 miles away.
The shell, when it leaves the barrel, is actually travelling at about 820 metres a second. That's over twice the speed of sound.
It's called the M777, heavy artillery but ultra lightweight. A gun designed for the post-Cold War world where speed and mobility are as important as firepower and accuracy.
Nowadays, the face of warfare has changed. We're looking at expeditionary warfare, early entry operation. Having to deploy your piece of equipment, your whole force, very quickly, very rapidly.
The 8-man detachment on the M777 is a well-oiled machine. These men typically handle more than 10 tons in weight when moving a heavy artillery piece like this. The M777's titanium structure is more than half that. Its innovative design makes it incredibly maneuverable. These men can get this gun ready to fire in less than a minute. This is today's ultimate artillery, yet the technology of the gun has been evolving for centuries.
We think the origins of the artillery go back to probably ancient China, perhaps the 11th, maybe even the 10th century. They certainly seem to have invented gunpowder. They tend to have used it for fireworks and crackers and for making a lot of noise.
Over the next 300 years, the use of gunpowder spread across the world. It was in Europe that its full potential would be exploited.
Somebody had worked out that packing gunpowder into a small confined space would yield tremendous results. Once the two married up, we have modern artillery.
Every gun needs a powerful force to propel its projectile. Gunpowder is a complex and dangerous substance. Medieval Europeans were only too eager to harness its volatility.
Medieval times, you had the old-fashioned trebuchets and catapults attacking castles, and this could take months and if not years to decimate a castle wall, to get a decent breach into it.
Suddenly artillery made all that obsolete. In a couple of hours, perhaps, you could hurl huge balls weighing perhaps a third of a ton at walls that had previously stood for years.
But the early gun's effectiveness depended upon a critical ingredient.
The quality of gunpowder is absolutely essential. The high quality powder gives you plenty of power to push your shell a long way down the range and to have a big target effect when it gets there.
The earliest gunpowder was very simple. It was called serpentine powder, and it was just a simple mixture of the three ingredients: saltpeter, charcoal and sulphur. And it was made by hand with pestle and mortar. Saltpeter is vital because it supplies the oxygen. The charcoal provides the fuel and the sulphur provides the ignition. So the three are absolutely essential together.
Now this is serpentine powder, and it was used first in 1346 at the Battle of Crécy. And the problem is making sure that each one of those ingredients is actually in the right place at the right time to get a good burn going.
These two lines of serpentine powder are from the same mixture, but are burning at completely different rates. Because of this, the range and accuracy of the gun was unpredictable. For guns to become really effective, a more reliable and consistent powder was needed.
And it was maybe over 100 years later when they developed a new technique called corning. And this is corned powder. And what it is it's the same mixture which was mixed up with water into a paste and then allowed to dry. And the cake of this dried gunpowder was then broken up into particles. And what happens then is that right down at a sub-particle size, you're mixing these things very much closer together, and it burns far better.
Here's corned powder put to the same test. It burns better and instantaneously. Compare this with the inconsistent performance of the serpentine powder. Corned powder was a massive improvement. It would be used in guns for the next 300 years. Yet through all this time, gunpowder remained a highly volatile and dangerous substance.
Artillery in the medieval times, up to even Victorian times, the Battle of Waterloo even, you could end up with several gun crews wiped out, decimated, as the powder charge expanded too quickly for the gun barrel itself. It can wipe out a whole battery of guns in literally 5 seconds. You can lose 200 men in 5 seconds.
On the M777 gun, the main propellant is no longer corned gunpowder. The propellant used inside this charge bag is based on a substance that replaced gunpowder a century ago. By the late 19th century, the limits of gunpowder had been reached. Gun designers were searching for a safer, yet more powerful propellant. They experimented with nitrogen-based substances mixed with dynamite and came up with cordite.
The beauty of the nitro propellant is that it's very predictable and very safe. It's very difficult to initiate by accident, and it's the use of it at the end of the 19th century that really makes gunnery a lot safer.
So after 600 years' use, gunpowder had become obsolete. By the outbreak of World War I, the more consistent and highly explosive cordite had taken over. Nitro propellants have been used with artillery ever since. So, a powerful, predictable and safe propellant is essential for the artillery gun. Each time this M777 gun fires a shell, an extraordinary force is generated inside the barrel.
Now the thrust to actually achieve that is generated in a barrel when the top charge goes off. That is actually equivalent to more than 2 jumbo jets. So the thrust you get from 2 jumbo jets, this gun can generate more.
To withstand this incredible release of energy, the sciences of chemistry and metallurgy meet head-on. Guns had been made for centuries before steel was invented. So how did the early medieval barrels deal with the forces generated by firing?
Once they got the gunpowder and it was able to burn and produce a large amount of gas, they needed to contain that in some sort of pressure vessel. And they did that by using strips of wood bound together in hoops, and that was able to contain the pressure and allow a projectile to be fired out.
These iron hoops would be heated until they were red hot. Then they were hammered into place. As they cooled, they would shrink to a tight fit around the wooden staves.
And it was the cooper's skills of those days that we used. And what was it known as? It was known as a barrel. And it was that name that stuck through history.
The end result was a gun that appears crude, but could be terrifyingly effective.
If it wasn't the psychological effect of having something belching fire and smoke at you when you first encountered a gun on the battlefield, to see that happen would have been quite startling, particularly to people who were superstitious or religious.
This type of artillery, at a stroke, leveled the playing field of battle.
Should you manage to get your artillery into the right position, it would literally sweep all opposition away.
When this hoop and stave gun is fired, a lot of the energy is wasted. Seen again on a high-speed camera, this becomes clear. The large plume of smoke and gas escaping between the staves at the rear of the barrel shows how inefficient this gun is. Many of the early medieval guns suffered from this problem or worse.
problem was, once gunpowder did go off, was containing the explosion, making sure the explosion drove the cannonball out of the gun and did not blow the gun to pieces.
And there are all sorts of problems in the early days with the hoops and staves coming apart and very often causing as much injury to the home team as the enemy.
If the gun was to reach its full potential on the battlefield, it would need a much stronger barrel. Its destructive force had to be controlled.
She is the face of law enforcement. On these small shoulders carry the dreams of a nation as it prepares to host its first Olympic Games. He's a Kung Fu student following a different path. Welcome to life behind the Great Wall. Discover the world, one person at a time. Discovery Atlas, China revealed. The journey begins in 3 days, exclusively on Discovery Channel. Philips Shavers, the Williams F1 team, share a passion for technology. The perfect performance that follows the contours of the track. And the contours of your face is the result of cutting-edge technology.
Yeah, okay, whatever. So, do you mind? Certainly, sir. Stand up to him, or Europe may be free. I do have the simplest taste.
You're always satisfied with the best, Mr. Wilde.
Each week, 4 engineering students from America take on the challenge to replicate some of nature's most ingenious designs. With the help of a team of experts in Australia,
It's going to be interesting.
they have 5 days to build it and make it work. The pressure is on while
This is where it's at.
chasing nature. Sundays on Animal Planet. Make the right connections.
Welcome to Connect. I'm Janice Golding.
One hot topic that links Asia to the world. The future with the past. Technology to human nature. Insights that connect East to West. Connect. Next on Discovery Channel.
As Europe came out of the Dark Ages in the 14th century, the gun was emerging into the light.
There was a need for some form of new weapon. Military technology never stands still. Man is always looking for another method of killing other men or demolishing their buildings.
But the unreliability of early guns was causing problems. What artillery needed was a means of producing a stronger barrel.
The science of gun barrel making really starts with the old gunsmiths in the medieval times. These guys were alchemists, they were witches, they were all sorts of things.
It may have seemed like magic, but in fact, it was casting from bronze. This centuries-old technology was now being perfected as foundries became capable of handling large amounts of molten metal. Reproduction cast bronze guns are still made today at this foundry in Middlesbrough, using skills perfected in the Middle Ages. Molten metal is poured into a mould and then allowed to set.
If you cast a cannon solid out of bronze, what you're getting is something which has far more inherent strength. There are no gaps, no points of weakness.
Once the cast is cooled, the finished gun is revealed.
Effectively, by the middle of the 15th century, we've got the artillery gun that's going to be with us really for the next 300 years.
Over the following centuries, the gun became the backbone of battle. Its design was refined to fire bigger and better shells, further and further. But at the same time, the defences against the gun were becoming stronger. In the middle of the 19th century, artillery was beginning to meet its match.
If one takes the Crimean War, it was a pivotal moment in armaments development.
On the shores of the Black Sea, the Russian fortress of Sebastopol was being pounded by an incredible artillery bombardment.
The French and the British fired something like 50,000 tons of iron. It did a lot of damage, but it didn't destroy Sebastopol at all.
The gun barrel had reached the limits of its power, but this was 1854, and the Industrial Revolution was transforming technology across the world.
When the Industrial Revolution comes around, our lives are completely changed. Everything, every aspect of our lives will be revolutionized, including, of course, warfare.
There was a new, ambitious generation of engineers, men like Robert Mallet. In the middle of the Crimean War, he turned his attention to artillery. Mallet calculated that to destroy a fort like Sebastopol would require a huge, cast-iron cannonball, but there was no gun barrel in the world strong enough or big enough to fire such a projectile, so he built one.
Mallet set about completely revolutionizing gun design technology. And instead of making it out of one piece of cast iron, in effect he produced a fairly thin-walled tube of iron, and on the outside of that he shrunk rings of wrought iron. Not just one layer, but several layers. So by the time he'd built up his 5, 6, 7 layers of rings, he'd created a gun of enormous strength.
Mallet's mortars remain to this day the largest bore artillery ever built. The width across the muzzle is an extraordinary 3 feet. Each cannonball weighs 1 ton. But this gun could only be built because it was now possible to handle and work huge quantities of metal. Machine power was taking over from manpower. The forging press making this gun barrel is more than 100 years old, but it still makes highly effective modern guns for the British Army. It can exert a force of up to 2,500 tons, squeezing huge ingots of steel like a banana. It was machinery of this scale that gave birth to the big gun at the end of the 19th century.
Once the Industrial Revolution had unleashed the industrial genie, if you like, the impetus to build bigger and bigger guns was unstoppable.
The shackles were off. Guns were constructed that could hit targets at ranges of more than 60 miles and sink ships with a single shell. The A gun had arrived.
Right, let's get this map under control then.
Not far from the White Cliffs of Dover lies a hidden gem.
Good grief, they're absolutely huge, aren't they?
80 tons.
Guns of never
each gun, 30 foot long.
Good grief.
Firing a projectile that's 3/4 of a ton.
So like firing a Volkswagen out into the middle of the channel.
Look at this breach. Now, there's a 6 foot diameter there.
These guns of the Dover turret, built in 1879 to fire at warships miles out into the English Channel. This was a massive task of engineering and construction.
Well, Nick, looking around at these guns, they strike me as some sort of form of Victorian weapon of mass destruction, some sort of super gun of the 1880s. Is that a fair assessment?
They're super guns, but they're massive weapons of destruction. But they were intended to destroy enemy battleships. It would have been fascinating to see if throwing these massive 3/4 ton projectiles, they would have blown ships out of the water.
For all their impressiveness, the Dover turret guns never fired a shot in anger, but they remain a testament to the great Victorian engineers. Today's gun barrels owe everything to the Industrial Revolution. Bronze and iron have been superseded by a metal with up to 4 times the tensile strength. High-grade steel. These gun barrels are machined to 1,000th of a millimeter precision. So the gun barrel has come along as the days of wooden staves and iron hoops. In the end, a gun is all about one thing.
I think the first thing you need to understand when designing a new gun is the purpose of a gun. What you actually see is just a chunk of solid metal. The purpose of a gun is to actually deliver a shell a distance.
share the belief that if something could be better, it should be. That engineering precision determines the win. And that small details make all the difference. It's only a hair's breadth that separates from second in a Grand Prix. And a good shave from the best. Invited to a whole new world. The crossing of dreams and discovery. Bringing the world together by taking the world everywhere. To 70 cities in 5 continents. Thai at Bangkok's Suvarnabhumi Airport. World's newest crossroads. Welcome to life behind the Great Wall. Discover the world, one person at a time. Discovery Atlas, China revealed. The journey begins in 3 days, exclusively on the channel. One hot topic that links Asia to the world. Insights that connect East to West. Connect. Next on Discovery Channel. They're back. And all set to put another batch of urban legends to the test. With science on their side, a motley crew at their disposal, and a no-holds-barred attitude.
That's what I'm talking about!
No tall tales spared. Mythbusters, tonight on Discovery Channel. It's what a gun fires that determines how effective it is. The projectile is the most important component of all.
It's the shell that is the weapon of artillery. This is what does the damage. Everything else you see is just a matter of pointing it in the right direction and getting it to the right place on the battlefield.
The modern artillery shell can hit targets at great range with superb accuracy.
We can guarantee to put a round into an area about 50 metres at a range of about 25 kilometres.
He makes it sound easy. It isn't.
What we try and do in the artillery is minimise the variables that affect the projectile landing on the target.
It's not very straightforward getting the round to the right place on the ground. There are so many different variables that we have to take into account.
The atmosphere that the projectile moves through, so we're talking about the weather, which way the wind's blowing, the temperature up there.
Today's guns have fire control systems that take into account atmospheric conditions. This helps ensure the shell's accuracy at long range. But up until the mid-19th century, artillery could only fire accurately at targets that its gunners could see. The cannonball was only effective at short range.
For a simple gun like this, the round shot was perfect. It flew well through the air and over relatively short distances remained accurate.
But battlefield commanders wanted more explosive effect and greater range without losing accuracy. The cannonball just wasn't up to it.
When the round leaves a gun barrel, its direction of flight, for instance, will depend on what part of the muzzle it hit just before it left. So it could fly straight ahead, it could bounce, fly slightly to the left. They weren't suited for long-range warfare.
In the mid-19th century, gun designers wrestled with this problem.
When the technology became available, we could utilize the space inside here more effectively, stretching the shape of the cannonball and turning it into an elongated projectile.
A cylinder would make more efficient use of the space inside the barrel. But when fired, as this high-speed camera footage shows, it loses stability in flight. It doesn't have good aerodynamic performance. Making the cylinder pointed would help, but it still wouldn't prevent it from drifting off target.
Now, a round cannonball is stable whichever way it's flying through the air, but an elongated projectile has to be spun to keep its stability in flight.
So how could a projectile be spun? Someone came up with a groovy solution. Literally, this is what's called a rifled barrel.
And what the rifling does, these grooves down the barrel, is actually imparts spin to the projectile as it travels.
When the projectile is fired through a rifled barrel, it grips the grooves as it moves forward and starts to spin. This gives it gyroscopic stability and a movement in accuracy. This advance in projectile technology is a key factor in the ability of modern artillery to hit its target time after time after time.
Together! Ammunition expended!
So the invention of the rifled, elongated projectile gave artillery more punch, greater range, and much better accuracy. But where does artillery go from here?
What we see in the future being fired possibly out of this sort of system, projectiles that will deploy wings once they leave the tube and guide themselves onto a target.
The priority in future operations is the ability to deploy there rapidly and get stuck in with early engagement. And to do that, we need guns that have plenty of punch, but we can fly forward very easily.
This is a mobile, self-propelled version of the M777 currently in development. It's controlled by computers inside the vehicle. It's loaded automatically, and it has an ingenious recoil system that dissipates the energy at the moment of firing straight down into the ground. This is perhaps the ultimate vision of the future gun. But it's the basic, classic qualities of artillery that some believe guarantee its longevity.
It hasn't really been replaced. There's been attempts to replace it by missiles and helicopters, but at the end of the day it's cheap and robust, it's virtually soldier-proof, there's very little that can go wrong with it.
The artillery piece can remain there. It can constantly keep it up for hour after hour, day after day, pounding a target into submission.
It'll work in pretty much all weather conditions, and as long as it's given the correct information and enough time to deploy, it can be absolutely devastating.